What are some of the most daring robberies ever? Let's find out. Starting with number 7, bad actors. We're going to start things off with a not so daring robbery. Raj Patel and Danny Curtis are a couple of, let's just call them non-professional criminals working at a gas station in Duluth, Georgia. They decided to attempt one of the lamest fake robberies ever. Curtis, wearing a hoodie, acted all tough while Patel laid sprawled out on the floor like he's taken a real beating after getting robbed. But it was all a setup. They cooked up this plan where Curtis pretended to rob the place while Patel played the victim. Now, the whole robbery performance wasn't exactly Oscar-worthy. First, Patel takes a dive after getting a slow-motion fake punch from Curtis. Then Curtis digs through the cash register like he's hitting up a Black Friday sale. Then they actually called the cops themselves, reporting an armed robbery. When the cops showed up, Patel was pretend trembling like a leaf, talking about some hooded bandit who beat him up and emptied his cash register. But there is a giant giveaway that this story was fake. There were no bruises on his face. Then Curtis gets caught red-handed by the dumpsters with cash spilling out of his pockets like he's one of the Beagle Boys. He tried to play it cool, acting like he didn't see a thing, but couldn't explain why he had a bunch of money flying out of his pockets. Despite the clearly suspicious scene, police didn't make any arrests that night. About a week later, the cops were able to review the security camera footage, and the poorly acted backyard wrestling match was exposed. Then, these two criminal geniuses both tried to pin the crime on each other. Curtis was first to spill the beans, saying Patel roped him into the whole mess. And Patel? Well, he's sticking to his story, acting like he's as innocent as a choir boy and that the robbery was real. Luckily, the cops saw through their act quicker than a bad magic trick. And now, they're both facing charges and awaiting trial as of the release of this video for cooking up this dumb scheme. Well, if the whole gas station gig doesn't work out, Patel could always take his acting talents to Major League Soccer. Number 6, just one shoe. Liam Tristram from the UK got himself a 6-year stay in jail for a pretty bold robbery he foolishly attempted. This guy thought he'd be slick by pretending to be injured, hobbling into a store on a crutch, only to turn around and commit a heist. He asked the shopkeeper for a pack of tobacco, but things escalated quickly. CCTV caught Tristram as he rushed behind the counter, used his crutch to strike the woman multiple times, and then pushed her down. He snatched about $550 worth of tobacco and a couple of bottles of liquor, even trying to make off with the cash register. Ditching his crutch, Tristram bolted for his bike parked outside. But the cashier wasn't having any of it. In what turned into a literal street showdown, the cashier chased him down and tried to lock him back in the store, using her shoe as a weapon, because she apparently learned to fight from a Latina auntie. But the power of a simple shoe wasn't enough to end Tristram's reign of terror. He doubled back, demanded more tobacco, grabbed a bottle of Coke, and then finally made his escape on his bike. Police caught up with Tristram the next day thanks to CCTV operators who spotted him. When they nabbed him, he was found with an empty bottle of vodka and a pouch of tobacco, likely leftovers from his haul. Despite Tristram's denial of any wrongdoing, the court found him guilty of robbery after a short trial. Eventually, Tristram was sentenced to 6 years in prison, apparently trading his freedom for a few $100 worth of alcohol and tobacco. Number 5, ATM robberies. An unnamed robber tried to make off with a stack of cash from a lady using an ATM in broad daylight on a bustling shopping street in central London. You could say he was lurking in the shadows, waiting for his chance, like Gollum eyeing the One Ring. But before he could make his daring escape, a good-hearted soul jumped into action and chased him down, making him drop most of the loot, which got handed back to the rightful owner. The poor lady, with her Selfridges bag, Selfridges being a high-end department store in the UK, kind of like Saks Fifth Avenue or Nordstrom, was just trying to do some banking when this shadowy figure dressed head to toe in black decided to play ATM bandit. First, the guy casually strolls up behind her, trying to blend in like he's just another regular guy, standing uncomfortably close to a stranger waiting to use the ATM. Then, quick as a hiccup, he shoved her aside and snagged the cash she was about to grab. But a good-hearted stranger was watching the whole thing go down, and he wasn't having any of it. He noticed the commotion and sprinted sprinted after the villain, making him drop most of the money in his escape. Despite police involvement, this ATM thief remains at large. ATM robberies can happen in any big city. If you're using an ATM, make sure your belongings are securely fastened. Stay vigilant in crowded spots, especially tourist attractions or public transport hubs, and avoid showing any valuable items. The biggest thing, though, is to trust your instincts. And if something feels off, don't hesitate to move away or alert authorities. The worst you'll do is offend someone who may not have been up to anything. By staying aware of your surroundings and taking precautionary measures, you can help deter pickpockets and protect yourself from getting your cash stolen. Number 4. Dropped in. An unnamed burglar from Los Angeles, California, had the nerve to break into M&M's smoke and gift shop through the ceiling, like you do. At around 7 a.m. on a Monday morning, arguably the worst of all mornings, he managed to cut a hole in the roof, lowered a bag, and then shimmied down a rope. Clad in a black hoodie and mask, he was in and out within 10 minutes, loading up on lottery tickets and cigarettes. Once he was done grabbing what he could, the burglar then reattached the rope to the bag and pulled himself out the way he came. The stolen items were valued at a total of around $7,000, according to the shop owner, Roy Hanna, who was none too pleased to find his store trashed later that morning. Of course, Hanna immediately reported the incident to the LAPD. Surveillance footage caught the whole act, showing the man rifling through the store's inventory behind the counter and at the checkout, though it's unclear if he snatched any cash. Hanna was left scratching his head over the thief's choice of loot, mainly lottery tickets and cigarettes. The aftermath footage shared on social media highlighted the bold escape route, a gaping hole left in the ceiling and a rope still dangling, as if Jones might have planned to come back for more. Hanna estimated the damage to his shop ceiling at about $9,000, adding insult to injury. As of the release of this video, the LAPD haven't identified the burglar or made any arrests. The whole situation left Hanna, and likely the police, quite baffled by the audacity and the seemingly amateurish yet incredibly successful heist. Number 3. The $30 million heist. Unnamed professional thieves orchestrated a daring $30 million cash heist from a Garda World facility in Los Angeles. They pulled off the caper with remarkable precision, sneaking in through the roof and accessing a safe without triggering any alarm. The LAPD and FBI found themselves scratching their heads as the crooks vanished without a trace. Scott Selby, a Harvard-educated lawyer and co-author of Flawless, a book about the famous Antwerp diamond heist, likened the thieves' skill set to seasoned gymnasts, pointed out that the difficulty of tracing stolen cash compared to distinctive items such as diamonds. The theft, one of the largest in LA history, echoed past heists, including the infamous 1972 United Bank robbery. Selby drew parallels, noting the crooks' meticulous planning and similar tactics as far as cutting a hole in the roof, but said there might be a potential downfall, a slip-up, akin to the unwashed dishes found in a safe house in the 1972 case that were covered in fingerprints, ultimately leading to the case being solved. Law enforcement sources revealed that the thieves might have gained access to the money storage area, possibly a vault, with insider knowledge. The bold nature of the break-in left investigators searching for leads, leading some to speculate about some inside involvement. The aftermath left both authorities and employees stunned, with one anonymous worker expressing disbelief of the crime being pulled off. The scale of the theft, reminiscent of past high-profile robberies, left many questions unanswered, including whether it was the work of a lone wolf or a coordinated crew. Despite modern technology, the elusive thieves remained a step ahead, leaving law enforcement with little to go on, except for the hope of a crucial mistake to crack the case wide open. But the fact that authorities are hoping for some sort of slip-up to crack the case makes us think that this case has a high chance of going unsolved. Number 2. The inside job. Money Perkins, a laundromat owner from East Flatbush, Brooklyn, met a tragic end when a robbery orchestrated by his cousin and 4 others spiraled out of control. The group, led by Perkins' own cousin, Ronnie Butler, 46, aimed to snatch a gold necklace valued at over $30,000. However, when their plan faltered, Perkins tragically lost his life. The tension between Perkins and Butler, who apparently had a long-standing feud, culminated in this confrontation inside the Money P Clean laundromat. The crew included Butler, Louis Mercado, Mercado's stepson, and their acquaintances Shalik Riddick and Deontay Stinson. They barged into the laundromat and drew firearms on Perkins as he cleaned a washing machine. A struggle ensued after Perkins lunged after Butler. The aftermath left Perkins without his gold necklace and ultimately his unfortunate passing as well. The group fled the scene in a white Honda Accord, which was registered under the name of Butler's girlfriend. The whole scene was captured on video, which later played a critical role in the investigation. Witnesses and surveillance footage were key to tracking down the suspects. They were spotted at a deli before the confrontation, and incriminating evidence, such as Instagram posts from the stepson, helped police link the suspects to the crime. Because someone always has to brag online, right? Mercado reportedly sold the stolen necklace after the hit, so it's gone. But police recovered a firearm from his home, further implicating him in the crime. The adults involved were arrested and appeared in court without bail, facing serious charges. And all of them have criminal pasts. These days, flexing expensive jewelry is making anyone a target, it seems. If you're going to wear your nice stuff out, be aware of your surroundings and try to stay in public places as much as you can. If you're enjoying this video, be sure to stay tuned right here for our past release to find out how this girl got her entire family into crime. Number 1. The wrong couple. In Sao Paulo, Brazil, a gutsy couple took down a would-be robber right outside their home. The mugger, riding a stolen motorcycle, approached them while they were walking. Things escalated quickly when he flashed a fake firearm, attempting to intimidate the two. The man, likely realizing the weapon was fake, didn't hesitate for a second. He lunged at the robber, grabbing for the weapon while his partner backed him up. Together, they managed to disarm the mugger and knock him to the ground. The scuffle continued as they dragged the mugger across the street, taking turns going after the mugger. It was a rough scene, and they didn't stop until the police arrived to cuff him, take him away. The motorcycle he used was also found to have been stolen from Campinas, a nearby state, adding another layer to his criminal activities. This brazen robbery attempt was halted by the couple's quick thinking and bravery. The event drew attention all the way to El Salvador, where President Nayib Bukele, known for his strong stance against street crimes, praised the couple's actions, tweeting about the power of love, complete with a heart emoji. At this point, it's important for us to remind you that while this story was awesome, and it's great that everything ended up okay, but this guy was lucky he was right that it was fake. Had it been real, the outcome could have easily been very different. Let's talk about some of the most despicable and heartless criminals around. Let's get right to it, starting with number 5, Crime Family. Jody Bowie, resident of Failsworth in the UK, managed to live a life that most can only dream of. One filled with high-end designer clothes, flashy jewelry, and even cosmetic surgery. But the source of her endless wealth wasn't from her job as a caregiver, it was from her boyfriend, Jonathan Walsh, a crime boss involved in a sophisticated trafficking operation worth £1.36 million. Jody's relationship with Jonathan began while he was serving a 14-year sentence for armed robbery, and it quickly led her into a world of excess and crime. You just never know where Cupid's arrow will strike, right? The couple began a descent into the criminal underworld, orchestrating a sprawling network dealing in all kinds of illegal substances. After her arrest, the court's revelations about Jody's lavish spending during the trial painted a pretty clear picture of a lifestyle that was basically impossible with her ordinary job as an elderly caregiver. She spent her newfound riches on high-end designer clothing, luxury watches, designer handbags, and even indulged in almost £5,000 worth of cosmetic surgery. On top of that, she splurged designer brands like Dolce & Gabbana, Louis Vuitton, Gucci, and Versace. Jody's association with her boyfriend's criminal activities became apparent, as it was obvious that the couple couldn't afford that kind of lifestyle through legitimate means. Jonathan had no declared income, and Jody knew full well where his money came from. Messages exchanged between the couple hinted at the extent of their lifestyle. Discussions of spending on cosmetic surgery worth £4,750 and buying vehicles to facilitate their dealing were just the tip of the iceberg. But the story doesn't end there. Jody's drive to maintain this lifestyle extended to a more serious level when she recruited her own family members into the business. Jody involved her parents, Janice and David, and her older brother Lee. They were brought into the network to make long trips from their home to the operations hubs. The contraband operation itself was a well-oiled machine, raking in a hefty profit margin. Jonathan Walsh's MO involved buying from wholesale suppliers, then selling it to dealers at a 30% profit. His associates ensured that the operation remained secure and secret, using encrypted phones and a password system to protect their activities. Inevitably, as with most criminal enterprises, law enforcement became aware of the operation, and it wasn't long before they were brought down. A police raid revealed a stash of firearms and other goodies that characterized their criminal activities. Some couriers were even found to be carrying grenades. In court, the family members faced some pretty serious consequences. Jonathan was handed a 15-year prison sentence, and Jody received a 21-month jail term, suspended for 2 years, along with a curfew and unpaid work. Jody's parents, Janice and David, were convicted of conspiracy to transfer criminal property, with David receiving a 10-month suspended sentence and Janice given 12 months custody, suspended for 18 months. In the end, the story of Jody Bowie shows that the relentless pursuit of an excessive lifestyle and easy money is a trap anyone can fall into, even someone's own mom and dad. At least she didn't end up like Tony Montana. Number 4. Masking profits. An unnamed elderly couple from France took legal action against an art dealer who bought an African face mask from them for a mere £129, then turned around and sold it for £3.6 million. It all went down out their home. Among the items they decided to part with was an African Ingle mask from Gabon. The couple found a buyer who was known only as Mr. Z, which, like, come on, Mr. Z? That's a bad guy name? Don't do deals with anyone who only goes by Mr. Z. Anyway, Mr. Z bought the mask at a low price and later sold it for a huge profit at an auctioneer in Montpellier, France. The mask was a rare find outside of Central Africa, with fewer than a dozen known to exist in museums around the world. It had been brought to France by the man's grandfather, a former colonial governor in Africa. The French couple was clueless about the true value of their artifact until they stumbled upon a news article talking about its sale for millions. Filled with a sense of betrayal and deceit, they decided to sue Mr. Z, accusing him of withholding information about the mask's real worth. Court in Nimes froze the proceeds of the sale as it deemed the couple's case to be well-founded in principle. The heart of the dispute revolved around the suspicion that Mr. Z was aware of the mask's value but chose not to disclose it. Instead, he reached out to various auction houses for estimates on its value, with the financial assessment coming from an African artifact specialist. The mask was eventually listed at auction with an estimated value between £259,416 and £345,888. But it sold for much more. To avoid legal action, Mr. Z offered the couple the lower estimate. However, their children turned it down. So what do you think? Was it ethical for a dealer to purchase an item like this for so cheap, aware of its true worth, and resell it for a huge profit? Was this a heartless scam by the dastardly Mr. Z, or simply a savvy business move in the art market of buy a crafty Mr. Z? Let us know in the comments. Number 3. Out of gas. Scammers found a way to bypass payment at gas pumps, effectively hacking the system to siphon off gas for free. The scam employed a Bluetooth-enabled smartphone and, in some cases, a tactic to trick the gas station attendants. In one example, a Detroit man managed to steal nearly 800 gallons of gas, equivalent to almost $3,000 from a Shell station. The scam's operation seems quite simple once you know the trick, which involved overriding the pump's system via Bluetooth, allowing the scammer to gain control remotely. The thief initiated this process using their smartphone. While this was occurring, another individual often distracted the gas station attendants to minimize the interference. The station lost valuable gasoline revenue, which can add up to a substantial loss given the soaring gas prices. When attendants tried to intervene by shutting down the pumps to halt the theft, they were totally powerless as their pumps were controlled by the scammer. While the specifics may differ, this gas pump hacking technique isn't isolated. Another incident took place at a speedway station where the scammers employed a slightly different method. One person distracted the clerk inside with a fake Cash App issue, diverting attention, while a second person hacked the pump. In this case, it was approximately $54. It's hard to feel too bad for gas stations getting ripped off, since pretty much everyone feels like they're being gouged at the pumps anyway. It's weird that these pumps have Bluetooth though, right? Why does everything have to have some sort of connectivity these days? Why would a gas pump even need Bluetooth? Number 2. He's Really Sorry. Dean McCulley, a name notorious for preying on vulnerable elderly women, once again found himself on the wrong side of the law. With over 36 previous convictions for scams targeting the elderly, McCulley's latest reign of deception ultimately led to his latest prison sentence. His 2 victims, referred to as Mrs. C and Mrs. N, were elderly Auckland retirees, both living alone and enduring personal hardships. McCulley's scheme involved befriending these women and using guilt and manipulation to swindle money. McCulley had approached 81-year-old Mrs. C, offering to perform household maintenance work. He convinced her that her house needed cleaning, so she agreed to pay him $1,500. But this initial amount only marked the beginning of his sham. He came back later asking for more money, even accompanying her to the ATM to ensure he received an additional $600 to $800. Only after persistent calls and pleas for more money did Mrs. C realize she was being scammed. The second victim, 80-year-old Mrs. N, was no stranger to hardship. Having recently recovered from a severe stroke, she was targeted by McCulley while working in her garden. He claimed he could clean her eaves and roof, and she agreed, handing him $520. Little did she know that this would be the first of many transactions. Over the course of a week, McCulley bombarded Mrs. N with various tales of financial woes, pressing her to lend him more money. In total, he managed to convince her to make 29 transactions totaling $11,900. The victim, overwhelmed by guilt and fear, felt forced into giving him the money. McCulley even went so far as to impersonate his bank manager or landlord during phone calls, further manipulating Mrs. N. When the weight of the scam became apparent, Mrs. N's family intervened, confronting McCulley and alerting the authorities, leading to his arrest. But the damage was done, as Mrs. N had been emotionally and financially drained. The court during his trial considered his extensive criminal history, which included 36 prior convictions for causing financial loss by deception. Despite previous sentences, McCulley clearly hadn't reformed. His consistent reoffending raised concerns about his attitudes, lifestyle, lack of consequential thinking, financial troubles, and an inclination to support criminal behavior. Both victims faced distressing consequences due to McCulley's actions. Mrs. C, who had been widowed for almost 10 years and who also had recently recovered from a severe stroke, had experienced a decline in her mental and emotional well-being. Mrs. N, too, suffered immensely, experiencing a loss of independence, anxiety, and isolation. She believed that her stroke had changed her thought process, leaving her more susceptible to McCulley's manipulations. With a history of relentlessly targeting of elderly women, it seems unlikely that he truly regrets his actions or is committed to rehabilitation. There's always hope that people can change and become a better version than what they are, but the sad reality is that there's just some people who need to be kept away from everyone else. Number 1. The worst best man. Martin Galvin was given the responsibility of arranging trips to Prague and a day at the races for his friend of 18 years, Dino Carter. Galvin took on the trusted role planning Carter's bachelor party, but exploited it for personal gain. He managed to pocket £7,945 from the groom and other members of the party. The money was intended to cover flights and hotel bookings for the upcoming events. However, instead of using the funds for their intended purposes, Galvin used the money on himself to fuel his gambling habit. Galvin claimed that he might have bowel cancer, which led to several hospital visits and excuses to divert attention away from the bachelor party planning. When the group arrived at the airport for their trip to Prague, they discovered that the flights and hotel rooms had never been booked, and the money was nowhere to be found. Not only did Galvin betray the trust placed in him as the best man, but he also took advantage of Carter's empathy by claiming he had terminal cancer. The lie was calculated to point that he reduced his friends to tears. But Galvin's lies didn't end there. He persistently and boldly lied about his health, crafting a believable illusion of a man on the brink of dire death. In court, the judge didn't mince words when he described Galvin's fraud as one of the nastiest and meanest he had ever encountered. The judge was astonished at the audacity of the lie, where a best man betrayed not only his friend's trust, but the sanctity of the role. Galvin was ultimately sentenced to 20 months in jail and ordered to fully pay back the 23 victims he swindled within 1 month. And it was over such a small amount. Don't get us wrong, £7,900 is a good amount of money, but is it worth a jail sentence and the destruction of the relationship with all your closest friends? Hopefully, Galvin figures it out and gets the help he clearly needs. Click to watch one of these next videos. Let us know in the comments section what you'd rather have to give up for a month. No laptop or no cell phone.